Number 1. The Visitor. A few years back, I rented a cabin with my friend Jennifer out in the forest. We were in the mood to spend some time out in nature, but we weren't willing to go all the way and spend the time in tents. So we rented the cabin, and we were set to spend 2 weeks out in nature. The cabin itself was set pretty far out in the woods. There were not other cabins that were really close to it. We wanted the full experience and felt that being isolated was the best way to get this. There wasn't electricity, so there wasn't a TV or anything like that. There was a propane tank that gave us hot water and allowed us to use the stove. Other than that, it was pretty rustic. For the first week that we were there, we had the sort of experience that we had been looking to get. We did some hiking and some fishing. We saw all sorts of birds and other animals. We actually began to feel really relaxed being far away from any people. At the beginning of the second week, we were inside preparing lunch when we heard a knock at the door. We were a bit surprised because it was the first contact we have had with anyone. I went to the door and there was a man there, possibly in his 30s, waiting outside the door. I asked him what he needed, and he told me he was the landlord for the cabin, and he was there to collect the rent for the week. This was puzzling because not only had we never seen this guy before, but we had paid for the cabin in full before we moved in. I told him this, and he said he didn't know what we were talking about. He then told us if we didn't pay for the week, he would have to call the police and remove us from the cabin. I got angry at this point and told him to go ahead. We had a receipt showing that we had paid for the cabin in full. The man began getting irate, again threatening to call the police, so I slammed the door in his face. We watched from the window as the man went out to his Jeep and drove away. I figured he was just some sort of con artist and tried to put it out of my mind. It seemed like a really stupid con. That had been around noon, and we hadn't heard from the person again. We figured that he realized that we saw through his con, and thus he wasn't going to try again. Jennifer went to her room and went to bed early. I decided to stay up and do some reading before bed. It was pretty late at night when I was reading by the light of an overhead lamp. Then I heard Jennifer scream in the other room. I immediately dropped my book, got up, and ran over to her door. I didn't have to knock on it as she opened the door and grabbed me. A noise woke me up, and that guy from earlier was looking in my window, Jennifer told me frantically. I rushed into the bedroom and looked out the window, but the guy was not there. I at first thought he was gone, but then I heard a pounding on the front door. It was a loud and frantic pounding. I ran into the living room and saw the man looking in through the window on the front door. He looked pissed, and he was pounding on the door, and he began yelling, "Give me my damn money!" over and over again. I was at first happy that the door was locked, and the man moved away from it. Just when I thought he had gone, though, I heard a crashing noise, and a rock came through one of the living room windows. Glass shattered all over the place. The man then tried to come into the house from the windows. The guy got into the house and tried to pull the curtains to the side. Honestly, I was at a complete loss as to what to do. I didn't have a gun or anything like that, which at that point in time I felt pretty bad about. Jennifer, however, had her head about her. She ran over into the kitchen and grabbed a big, heavy skillet. By the time the intruder got the curtain out of his face, Jennifer hauled off and slammed him right in the face with the pan. When he fell back, she hit him again. The second hit knocked him over, and a third hit knocked him out. Jennifer panicked again, and for a moment I thought that the man hadn't been knocked out. But then she reached down and picked something up off the ground. The man had broken through our window with the meat cleaver in his hand. Who knows what would have happened if Jennifer hadn't acted so swiftly. Number 2. The building in the woods. Have you ever driven through one of those really rural areas and seen those old, gray, abandoned, and weather-torn buildings sitting off the road? Some of them are set in the strangest places, and you wonder why anyone would have ever built a building there. I enjoy exploring those sort of places due to the way it allows my imagination to think about what the building's history was. You also sometimes find these places out in the middle of forests and fields. In those cases, I tend to assume that they were there, and that the forest eventually grew up around the buildings once they had been abandoned. A few years back, I was exploring out in the woods trying to find some new places. I was pretty deep in the woods, probably trespassing on someone's property, but I honestly didn't care much about that. Late in the afternoon, around the time when I should have begun heading back, I came across a really dilapidated 2-story building. The building itself was rotting, and it was covered with moss and even had a tree growing through it. I had no idea how long it had been there. I had to be careful entering the building because, as far as I knew, anything that looked so worn down might have weak floors in it. Walking up the steps, I definitely heard some loud creaks. But despite my worries, the steps and the porch held up rather well. It was when I entered through the door that I finally realized exactly what the building had been. There was a very small foyer, and that led into the main room, which took up the majority of the bottom floor. I was surprised to discover that it was a one-room schoolhouse. There were old desks lined up in straight rows. There was even a chalkboard on the wall farthest from me. I had never seen a one-room school before, so I was quite intrigued. I walked through and past the desks and the chalkboard to where I saw another door. It led into a back room, I assumed, since it wasn't set far enough back to be a back door to the building itself. When I opened the door, it seemed like some sort of office or something, but that wasn't what caught my attention. The floor was absolutely covered with animal bones, and I don't even mean just a little bit. There were piles of animal bones all over the floor. Bones were strung together with string and hung from the walls and from the ceiling. I was freaked out a little, and I decided to go back into the main room. As I did, though, something else caught my attention. The floor had been creaking as I was walking along, but when I stopped, I realized that something was creaking above my head. It was a 2-story building, and it was apparent that either an animal or a person was on the top floor of the building. I, of course, tried to convince myself that it was just an animal. But still, I felt uncomfortable. I thought it might just be a good idea to get out of the building. I took my camera out to take a few pictures. When I decided to try and get a shot at the lighting fixtures, I turned the camera up to the ceiling. And that's when I saw it. Above me, half of a human face looking down from a hole in the ceiling. When the eye watching me blinked, I nearly pissed myself and dropped my camera, but then the face disappeared. I heard then more creaking sounds as the person upstairs quickly began walking around, and then I heard them coming down a staircase. I had enough. I found my camera. Grabbing it, I just decided to get out of that building as quickly as possible. I ran out, and I didn't look back. I got out of that building, and I just kept going until I was sure that no one was following me. It's weird because I had no way of knowing if the person in that building was dangerous in any way. But for some reason, seeing that eye blink, and then hearing them come down the stairs was the most frightening experience of my entire life. I didn't even want to see the actual person. I mean, sure, I was out in the middle of nowhere, looking through an abandoned building. But that person was there before me, on the exact same day. I decided it was just best to get as far away as possible. Number 3. My dad's cabin. When my dad passed away, one of the things he left me was his cabin. I hadn't been to it since I was a kid. Being out in the wilderness was never really my thing. Although it had electricity and even one of those big old satellite dishes, I still always felt that I was too far away from civilization to truly enjoy it. But it meant a whole lot to my father, so when I inherited it, I decided not to sell it. I went up to it occasionally just to maintain and make sure it was safe and secure. I never really had any intention of spending any significant time there myself, though. About 5 years after I took possession of the cabin, I had a really unpleasant experience when I was going up for a routine checkout of the place. When I would do this, I generally drove up for the weekend. It was a long drive from where I lived, so I would spend the entire weekend in the cabin, then I'd go home. This particular time, the weather report proved to be extremely wrong. On the way to the cabin, the dark green and black clouds began to overtake the entire sky. While I was driving into the hills, I had a front row seat to an amazing lightning show. This was going to be one of those really nasty storms, I could tell. As soon as I arrived at the cabin, I couldn't figure out why, but I immediately had a feeling of nervousness come over me. I was hoping that it was just because of the storm and not that I was getting a sixth sense about anything. The rain began falling about 5 minutes before I arrived, and it was pouring hard by the time I got out of my car. I didn't bring an umbrella and had to run to the door. I was distressed when I realized the door was unlocked. I began worrying right away. It had been about 6 months since the last time I had been to the cabin. I had no way of being absolutely sure if I had locked the door or not. I was concerned that someone may have robbed me. I went inside, and for the most part, everything looked pretty normal. It wasn't until I went into the kitchen that I got concerned. The window on the kitchen door was broken, and it had a garbage bag taped up over it. I didn't do that. Someone had broken into my cabin. Immediately, I went to the front door and locked it. If someone had been staying there, they weren't there now. I checked throughout the cabin and made sure all the windows were locked. I would have gone back out to my car and went to look for the police if the rain wasn't coming down as hard as it was. I went throughout the house to see if anything was missing. The bedroom was a bit of a mess. I checked in the closet, and thankfully, my dad's shotgun was still in it. I really had no experience with a gun before, but I did know how to load it. I did so, and then laid it on the bed. If someone had been living in the cabin and was coming back, I needed to be prepared for them if they were dangerous. I had been in the cabin for a few hours before nightfall. I made sure the lights in the front room were on, so if whoever had broken in came back, they would see that somebody was there. It was really late at night when I saw a pair of headlights shine through the front window and onto the cabin wall. Peeking outside, I saw what I assumed to be a large pickup truck with its high beams on. 2 people got out of the cab, but didn't turn the lights off. I was already worried, but I was even more worried when I noticed that both of the guys were carrying what looked like rifles with them. They stood in front of the truck for a moment before I saw them begin to walk forward. They stopped at my car and stood on either side of the car. In the silhouette, I watched as both guys raised up the butt of their rifles and heard the sound of both my car windows shattering. After that, they then shattered the back windows of the car. Then, they began moving back towards the house. Of course I panicked. I had two people who were obviously the people who had broken into my father's cabin approaching it after breaking the windows out of my car. I ran over and grabbed the shotgun. I wasn't sure what I could do because I couldn't open the door because I would expose myself to them. But these guys were going to get up to the cabin door, and who knew what they would do if they got a hold of me. So I went and broke the window of the front door. I stuck the barrel of the shotgun out and pulled the trigger. In addition to the loud explosion, I heard one of the guys scream out as he fell over. I was concerned that I hit him because I just wanted to fire a warning shot. The other took his rifle and shot at the house a couple times, but it seemed like he was just trying to warn me too. I watched from a vantage point from which neither guy would be able to see me. I saw him help the other guy to his feet and pulled him back to the truck. He tossed the hurt guy into the cab, and they drove off. I spent the rest of the night completely on edge, expecting them to return. The interior of my car was completely ruined. I had to clean it out to at least drive into town. I had to bring the sheriff out and let him look around. I ended up spending a few more days up there, restoring the damage done to my cabin. There wasn't a whole lot I could do other than install a security system in the cabin. I try to go up to it every couple months instead of every 6 now. Each time I do, it's as scary as hell though. Every time I open the door, I expect one of those guys to be back. So far, they haven't been. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the button next to the tabby to be informed of new content. Feel free to follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. Also, if you like this video, please feel free to share it with others in the hopes that we can entertain new people. If you have a story that you'd like to share, please email your story to the address included in the description of this video. The only criteria I have for stories is that they haven't been read on any other channels. I'd like to try to keep my content fresh as possible. Now, July has been a bit of a slow month for me video-wise because I haven't had a lot of story submissions. However, things are picking up now, plus I've done some writing of my own. If you like 2-sentence horror stories, Truth is Scarier Than Fiction and I will be collaborating with some completely new ones. I also have a few other collaborations coming up as well. I want to thank all of you for your continued support and for watching my videos. It means a lot to me to know I am entertaining you. And please, don't forget to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.